Washington city of Bellevue made a disturbing discovery in a local park. Youths had noticed what they first thought to be a pile of clothes, but later realised might be something more sinister. When detectives went to investigate, they found it was the body of a young woman. She had been beaten with a blunt instrument and apparently strangled with the rope that was still around her neck. Upon closer inspection, police concluded the body belonged to 20-year-old local woman Kimberly Ann Wilson, and made preparations to notify her next of kin at the family home just a few blocks away. However, nothing could have prepared them for what they would discover there. When officers arrived, they noticed the driveway of the property was full of cars, but the house was in darkness. No one answered the door, and concerned police entered the home to perform a welfare check. Inside, they discovered the bludgeoned and mutilated body of Kimberly's mother, Rose Wilson, 46, in the bed in the master bedroom. At the foot of the bed was 52-year-old William Wilson, who had sustained similar injuries. Horrified, police made their way through the rest of the house and found Kimberly's 17-year-old sister Julia dead in her own room. She was the most severely injured, and it was concluded that she had heard the commotion from her parents' room and gone to investigate before being chased by the attacker or attackers and fighting desperately for her life. Patricia Eakes, one of the responding officers at the time, told the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, "It was such a shock. We thought we were going to the home to notify them of the death of their daughter. It was like a bad dream." At first, investigators feared, due to the level of violence at the scene of the crime, that they could be dealing with a perpetrator who was a stranger and therefore might strike in the area again. But then they started to look into the lives of the victims and found a link between Kimberly and what was known as the Saturday Night Denny's Club. This was the moniker for a small group of high school friends who hung out at a nearby restaurant and talked about role-playing games in which they pretended to be vampires, ghosts, witches, or fallen angels. They also liked to dress up in dark clothing and discuss gothic subculture. Although Kimberly was not one of the group, she had friends who were, and had also briefly dated another named David Anderson, 17. He was a high school dropout who, along with his best friend Alex Baranyi, was also heavily into fantasy role-play games. However, based on a tip from one of the group, it was discovered the two had begun talking about death and expressing an interest in murder, although this was written off at the time as tough talk. Even more worryingly, another witness told police he had had a conversation with Anderson wearing trench coats, and had failed to return before 3 a.m. the following morning. Police swept in to question the two teenagers. Baranyi quickly confessed to the murder of Kimberly. He said he then went on to kill the rest of the family so they could not identify him, and because he was in a rut and feeling descendant, the spokesman review reported. However, he refused to implicate Anderson and insisted the crimes had all been his own doing. Police turned to the forensic evidence to prove, based on blood splatter patterns, that there were two people in the Wilsons' master bedroom when the killings occurred. They also collected a pair of Anderson's boots that displayed the genetic profiles of both William and Julia Wilson. Both boys were arrested and charged with murder. According to King County Prosecutor Norm Meleng, evidence suggested the youngsters carried out the murders for the sheer experience of killing and appeared to have chosen the Wilsons because Kim had asked Anderson to return $500 that he owed her, which angered him. Because Kimberly knew both boys, it was easy for them to lure her to the park in which she died. They then went to her house and murdered the rest of her family, tussling with both Mr. Wilson and Julia before they overpowered their victims. Interestingly, in an eerie premonition of the psychology behind the high school massacre at Columbine that was to come 2 years later, psychologist Karen Fromin said Baranyi had been in a deep depression for months and was, like Dylan Klebold, considering suicide. It was only when he became dependent on Anderson, who planned and instigated the murders, as Eric Harris apparently did in Colorado, convincing Klebold to join him, that he decided to make real the violence he acted out in roleplay. Afterwards, it emerged that Baranyi had written in his fantasy journal. Again, this is reminiscent of the journals that would be left behind by the Columbine killers. Baranyi wrote, "Death and killing neither worries or scares me. Within our hands we hold the flame of life. I have done the unspeakable. I have become a god. Only emptiness filled me when I became empty. I filled that space with pain, anger, hatred, and evil. The 4 violent suicide is a difficult one to define, but in this case, that line may have been crossed. In a prison interview with the Eastside Journal, Baranyi said, "If I was the jury, I would have found me guilty too. It's a very gruesome thing, and it's not something I want to remember. I look back and think I couldn't have done it. It seems like it was a different person." Both perpetrators were too young for the death penalty, and some even criticised the mandatory life sentences. But Jeff Bard rebuffed this in light of the violence involved. "I'm more interested in protecting the community than conducting some sort of experiment with Mr. Baranyi and rehabilitation," he added. There was a final shock in this case some 20 years after the murders, when in 2018, Washington's Supreme Court ruled that a life sentence for juveniles convicted of aggravated murder constitutes cruel punishment and is unconstitutional. Justice Susan Owens said, "The direction of change in this country is unmistakably and steadily moving toward abandoning the practice of putting child offenders in prison for the rest of their lives." Unfortunately, the conviction of Baranyi could be among those affected by this ruling. A spokesperson for prosecutor Dan Satterberg told the Seattle Times, "A sentence of life without the possibility of parole will no longer be possible in that case. We are closely reading the opinion to determine what sentence is allowed under the Supreme Court's decision." Could it be that a legal loophole means these most cold-blooded of killers will soon be eligible to walk